Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend. It's a beautiful fall day outside. It is harvest time. And for us, it's time for Thanksgiving. So we've got a beautiful 18th century recipe for Thanksgiving. You're gonna love this pumpkin pie. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. The recipe today comes from American Cookery by Amelia Simmons. This is 18th century. This is 1797. And Amelia Simmons has, in this particular cookbook, has an amazing number of Thanksgiving Day recipes. She doesn't call them out for that, but if you want roast turkey recipe, it's in here. If you want a pumpkin pie, yep, you want cranberry sauce, it's in here. It's a wonderful cookbook for this time of year, and it's American cookery. It's the first cookbook printed in America with American recipes, American ingredients. So perfect for this time of year. There are a couple of pumpkin pie recipes in here. Actually, they're called pumpkin puddings, but they're pumpkin pies. There's a squash pudding in here. So there's multiple ones. We're gonna go with pumpkin pie number 2. This one is, the recipe's almost too quick to read. Number 2, 1 quart of milk, 1 pint of pumpkin, 4 eggs, molasses, allspice, ginger, in a crust, bake 1 hour. That's it. That's all there is to it. It couldn't be any easier than that, right? So there are some assumptions in here. If we go back and look at recipe number 1, we find out that the pumpkin is stewed and strained. Now, I did not stew and strain my pumpkin for today's recipe. It works out so much better if you bake the pumpkin instead. If you put it on a baking sheet, bake it for until it's nice and soft, then it doesn't add a whole bunch of water to the pumpkin, and it makes it just super easy. We can just peel the skin right off of this and then take the internals and mush them up and push them through a strainer, and we get a nice, wonderful pumpkin pulp out of this. Really, really easy to do if you've got a nice small pumpkin, but the pumpkin pulp is very easy to get from the store also, so you can do it either way. Super easy to make. All our ingredients are ready. We can start to mix the internals of our pie together. I'm gonna start off with our pumpkin. Now, she called for a pint of pumpkin. That's enough. This whole recipe is enough to make 2 normal pies. We're only gonna make 1 pie, so I'm gonna cut this in half. So we need about a cup of pumpkin pulp here. And there, that is exactly a cup of pumpkin pulp. So milk is the next ingredient. The recipe calls for 1 quart, so we're gonna put in a pint of milk. And I would make it whole milk if I were you. Next up, 2 eggs, and we're just going to whip these up a little bit first before we toss them in. There we go, our 2 eggs. And that's really all the sort of main ingredients we have here. Now we have spices, and it calls for ginger. Now, of course, there's no amounts. It's all about how rich we want this pie. This is the second pie. The first one had a lot more spices in it. So you can almost kind of judge by what's going on here that there's an inexpensive pie and an expensive pie. So we're doing the inexpensive one, as it were. We're gonna use a good bit of ginger though. It's one of the least expensive spices. And then allspice also, again, one of the lesser expensive spices in our time period. And we're gonna go whole hog here and just put a whole bunch in there. I really wanted to do recipe number 1 because it had nutmeg in it. We're just gonna cheat and we're gonna put nutmeg in this one anyway. As long as you don't tell anybody, it'll be all right. So all the ingredients so far have been just very, very typical in your standard pumpkin pie recipe of today. Maybe molasses isn't something that you've normally put in a pumpkin pie, but that's in this recipe. And we don't have an amount. It's how kind of sweet we want it to be and how much molasses flavor we want to come in here. I'm gonna go with about 1.5 teaspoons. Just a little, there we go. 1.5 teaspoons of molasses. And that should give us a little bit of sweetness, not too much. And let's get this really mixed well. Molasses is also going to help us out with that color. It's going to give us a nice, rich brown color on our pumpkin pie, not, you know, sort of a sickly green yellow color. We don't want that. Now it's time for our pie crust. Now I've already prepared some pie crust dough here from Amelia Simmons' cookbook. She's got 5 or 6, even I think 7 recipes for different kinds of pie crust. Today, you know, usually we just have, you know, one kind of pie crust. This one has some egg in it, which is not what I usually put in a pie crust, but this will be fun. Let's get this worked out here. I think it's really interesting that she's got multiple kinds of pie crusts. Some of them are for different kinds of dishes, and other ones seem to be maybe a pie crust for a beginner, so it's a simpler way to do it, right? So there's multiple reasons why there's 7 different kinds of pie crust in here. Maybe there are also richer ones, you know, ones that use more expensive ingredients, and then simpler ones. So maybe you don't have all the ingredients for one kind of pie crust and you'll try another one, although they're all very similar. I like pie crust, so I'm gonna make this one kind of thick for our pie. So the filling was sitting there while I was working on the pie crust, and it can kind of want to settle. So make sure to give it a stir before you fill up your pie crust. But our pie crust is all set in our pan. It's got its little crimping all the way around because you want it to look nice. And we've stirred up our filling, so now we can pour it into our pie crust. Our pie is all assembled and ready to go into the oven. Our oven's already fired up, but if you're gonna do this in a modern kitchen, in a modern oven, probably 350 degrees for 45 minutes to an hour or so, you'll start to see, you know, the crust brown up and the custard start to set up. It's not gonna completely set up in the oven. That happens when it comes out and starts to cool, but it should start to at least look like it's setting up. So let's get this one in the oven so we can try it out. Well, our pumpkin pie turned out. It's sliced up very, very nicely. It's still slightly warm, and yet it's still held together exactly like it should have. If we let it cool off, which I didn't want to wait, it would have sliced up even better. Got a wonderful color, smells tremendous, and hopefully the taste is the same on this guy. Nice little custardy consistency on the inside. I think I made the right call with the amount of spices. It's got some nice spiciness to it. Probably not as sweet as you might be used to on a pumpkin pie. Since the sweetener is just the molasses, I didn't put a whole lot in there. because if I did, it'd bring in a whole lot of molasses flavor that maybe I don't want. So it's not too sweet. Normally, I like mine with a lot of, fluffy whipped cream on the top of that, and that can help that. I think it's got a tremendous flavor to it, and the crust turned out great too. I think that's a 10. It's a really good pumpkin pie. Really happy with how that one turned out. This would make, and it's got a, sometimes you get pumpkin pies that have too thick of a consistency, like too hard. This one is light and fluffy, even though it doesn't have some of those things that you would expect to make a pumpkin pie light and fluffy. This one really, really, really good. I really like it. So this recipe did not call for the nutmeg, but we put some in anyway, and that definitely was the right call. Could have probably even put in more, because that's really the best part of a pumpkin pie. So don't miss out on the nutmeg in your pumpkin pie. This one is definitely an 18th century pumpkin pie. 1797, Amelia Simmons. She did a tremendous job of giving us a pumpkin pie recipe that we could put in our Thanksgiving Day meal. So hopefully for your Thanksgiving Day meal, you can have one just like this. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming along. We try out all kinds of different things, and sometimes they work out, and sometimes maybe not so much. Usually though, they're definitely worth the experiment, and boy, this one is good. If you're interested in more Thanksgiving Day dishes, make sure to check out this playlist. It's chock full of great recipes.